Oh, that's a popular one amongst a few.
That's right.
Tried and true. Tried and true. So here we go. Pain and Essia up against each other, and they are both running sword. There's just so much sword. Sword, blood, rune, everywhere. Everywhere, Exo.
That's right. So one quick question I want to ask you, Mofu. Have you seen Old Man and Old Woman in any deck yet? Can you tell me why you think Essia is playing it?
I actually have not seen Old Man and Old Woman yet, but I do have a theory as to why it appears, which is that one thing that aggro sword is particularly vulnerable to, especially in aggro mirrors, is they don't have a good turn 4 when going second, which is there are not very many reactive 4-drop cards, and Old Man and Old Woman can kind of fix this, in that it's capable of clearing 2 things and establishing a board advantage if it survives a series of 2 trades. It's a way to sort of stay relevant even if they have to play for a little bit more value, and so that's why I'm actually really pleased by its inclusion.
Awesome. And Old Man and Old Woman, I'm assuming, is an officer, which would make it work with White General. So, and because it can attack 2 times per turn, we're talking about an on-the-play value play of Old Man, Old Woman into White General into 6 damage, which is pretty big.
I think it's actually a little ironic that Essia does run Old Man and Old Woman, but I think his list actually doesn't have the White Generals.
Oh, he's not running the White Generals. Okay, interesting. Okay, so probably a purely defensive option.
Though I really do love the into White General. I think that's a very, very cute way to curve it out. One thing I was actually about to mention that I observed about Payne's list is although he runs 2 White Generals, his list has a lot of commanders going into turn 4. So it's not really something that he can use as a very strong turn 4 some of the times, especially when he loses his place on the board here. Would be Essia, but...
That's true. And one thing that I want to keep making mention of is Bladed Hedgehog keeps finding more and more room in sword decks, whether they be mid, aggro, whatever. It's just starting to come through a lot more than it ever used to be, and I really like this. I think Bladed Hedgehog's crazy, and now everybody else thinks so too. I like it.
I think, especially with Forest kind of finding a bit of a footing, a lot of players had, within the past, like, general time frame, started to play Vanguard a lot more over Quickblader, and that led to the popularization of Princess Vanguard. And I think she taught people herself that the 1/3 stat line on a 2-cost follower is really, really useful. And that, I think, is what led to Hedgehog becoming so popular. And he's proven himself in, I think, almost every list we've seen.
And Essia deciding he's just too far behind, can't deal with the board, and just exiting out of that game. So Payne goes up a game in the mirror. All right, so here's another interesting thing. I think we have a lot of awesome stuff to talk about today because the format shifted. So we're back to seeing aggro forest with Hyperia again, the 5-play point, 5/4 with ambush. And we saw it a little bit at the beginning of the season when it was pure aggro, but now we've come full circle to where the format's changed. Control's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit. Maybe there's some more combo. We see a lot of D-shift and now just straight aggro lineups. And aggro force being the ban from both players. So both players thinking it's the strongest aggro deck right now, or maybe just the best against other aggro decks. Have you gotten a chance to play with the aggro forest list at all?
I have. Unfortunately, I was on the receiving end of it, and I completely empathize with banning it if these players' main game plans are going to be aggro, which is Forest has a special privilege called Wood of Brambles, which makes it nearly impossible to mount any sort of board against them in the early game. Not trading can lead to very, very tough punishes, and then not having board against Forest leads to a lot of very quick losses to Elf Song or the likes. So I feel that in a scenario where both players are going to be trying to play their aggro decks, Forest is just the one class you don't want to try to play that against.
That's just awesome. I love meta shifts, and aggro Forest being back on top seems awesome and very out of place to me. But that's why I think a lot of people are packing Uriases and things like that in case they need to let something like Forest through, which, again, we saw Fatina make perfect use out of with his basically counter deck to that. So it's a lot of metagaming going on today, and I think players are on top of what they need to be doing.
Absolutely. I'm actually still really impressed by that from before, as we see a lot of aggro lists don't really even just run Ram for the very reason that they don't really
Right.
see it as a very high impact 2-drop. But
It doesn't do
to be
face
able to-
damage.
basically. But I think being able to throw together an aggro list that also has a game plan of how it can get an edge against other aggro lists in the mirror, I think is a really important part of handling all of these matchups. And I'm still just so impressed by the way Fatina did earlier.
That's right. And even players that we know mostly play either combo or control, like a Fatina. Later in the day, we'll see people like Sheepy playing even just full aggro lineups. Like, nobody today really had a penchant for bringing control except for Bad, which we'll get to. But this is like aggro all day, every day for all these players. And it's just, it's crazy to me. People are like, I want to beat D-Shift or I want to play D-Shift. And we'll see how it plays out through the course of the day. But getting back into this game, Pain, like we like to say, Pain, he likes to bring it, right? He's the Pain train. He likes to bring the pain. And I feel like we're not going to see him play anything other than aggro, and because it suits his playstyle very well. In the game state that we're in right now, talk to me. We've missed a couple plays here, but who do you think's got the edge at the moment?
We see Essia at a pretty significant life advantage, which usually is tied in the aggro mirror to going first. But I'm actually thinking that this life advantage isn't going to mean very much for Essia coming up. Right now he has a very tough position where he can play out a lot of followers. He seems to be willing to commit all of them, perhaps, in an attempt to get as much as he can. But with only a Dance of Death left in his hand, all Pain needs to do is figure out a way to swing tempo against Essia once. And if he can manage to do that and survive, Essia's just about out of gas here.
Yeah. The one potential hazard I see is that Night Horde being the best option Pain has kind of stinks when Urias is sitting across the table. So there are good times for Urias as well, everybody. So don't think he's just a terrible card now. But yeah, I think this board with Urias, if Urias wasn't here and that was just another 1-2 or a 2-2, I think Pain would be in a great spot. But because it is specifically Urias, I think Pain is quite a bit behind here.
He has to pay 2 defense even just to play Night Horde, as it wouldn't be able to clear otherwise. I think removing as much damage as possible by hitting the 2-1 and evolving over the Urias is absolutely the best way to handle that turn. But it does put Pain just low enough that Essia could top deck just a little more reach. Bloodwolf being a very good example of that.
Yes, Bloodwolf being a prime example of that. As well as being cheap. One thing that I've always really liked about Bloodwolf in Blood is simply the fact that it top decked with any other spells in your hand with an evolution orb means crazy amounts of damage for very minimal card economy, essentially. Like Sword, in order to do it, has to combo specific cards together, or of course Albert, but that costs 5. But Blood can just put it together with a couple cards in hand with an evolution orb to just kind of push the game to a close.
And because of that, I think actually Essia's consideration here is playing the Dance of Death, because it's more likely if he holds the Wolf that he'll be able to play it with really the rest of his deck soon. But I was wrong. Decides to go for the Blood Wolf instead.
So this play makes a little less sense to me because A, you could save the second evolution orb for the Blood Wolf, and B, better play point usage like you were talking about. Where Dance of Death this turn plus, or next turn, Blood Wolf plus another spell with the Evolution Orb, I think would have totaled more damage. So interesting line here.
Right. I suppose the difference between that and Dance of Death is he holds removal against something that he could be afraid of and develops one more body on the board. I think that it's a perfectly fine play, but it does mean that Essia is committing to a bit of a slower game plan. He's assuming that he gets the board swung back against him here if he loses everything, which, glancing at Pain's hand, isn't really something that I think Pain can do without committing a Razor Claw, which is really dangerous for him to do. Actually, now looking more closely at it, it's very difficult for him to get over the 3-4 stat line, which is very fortunate for Essia. But I think going for the Wolf and holding the Dance of Death is saying that he'd like to just top deck a little bit more damage in the future to have a little bit more of a safety net in the Dance of Death.
Speaking of dealing with the 3-4, I was thinking about the line from Pain to just Dance of Deathing this turn and running into the Wolf. And just kind of like hoping my opponent doesn't have it, leaving the 1-drop in play, but Apparently he thinks leaving the 3-4 in play is more optimal.
I think if he had gone with the Dance of Death route, he could have prevented a lot more damage. He puts himself in a situation where the Razor Claw in his hand isn't going to be a very good tool coming up.
Right.
As we know with this Dance of Death, he won't be able... That's effectively lost from his hand because of this play, but in doing so, he does get the board back for the time being, assuming that Essia doesn't turn around and decide to trade when Pain's only at 6 remaining.
Right. I mean, we've seen crazier things happen, but 1 is not 0. And if Pain does go to 1 here and takes back board control, it could just be that Essia doesn't find another point of damage and just draws, you know, Curse Brand Vampires and things like that. Maybe more Vites and just not any direct damage, so...
Indeed. Interesting evolve here. Okay, it seems that he is definitely going to commit this 3-4 face. I'd say there's very little reason not to. But I'm contemplating how different that turn may have looked had he held the Blood Wolf rather than the Dance of Death.
This turn makes a little bit more sense to me. This essentially says, I want you to play your Razor Claw, and then I can just kill you with my Dance of Death. Also, it gives me an out if I'm Essia to deal with Caraboss evolved, which I would have no other way to deal with. That card is just massive. So...
At any rate, we see Essia in a position where just the slightest bit of damage would be enough, and Urias almost promises it, but he is dead on board. Though that does go in for a pretty decent trade against the 3-1. Or,
That's right.
He would hope that it could.
So this is... Wow. Chooses not to Dance of Death that and sacrificing board position to do this. I feel like this kind of takes him away from a lethal setup next turn. Never mind.
Perhaps.
Dance of Death would be lethal, but... Oh, there it is. You can see Essia's elation.
Yeah, Essia's plays have now started to make a lot more sense to me. He had a lot of turns and a lot of time to find just a little bit of damage he needed, whereas Pain had lost a lot of tools from his hand just due to that life disadvantage.
That's right. I feel like if you do have the life advantage, you have room to make more plays. So Essia definitely had a train of thought about how he wanted to deal damage over time. I really feel, though, that Blood Wolf play, the first Blood Wolf play over the Dance of Death, might have cost him a turn. And that turn is all you need in this sort of matchup, right? Like, say, for instance, he drew a Vite that turn, as opposed to a Caraboss or something that dealt damage, he just loses. However, if he plays the other way, he actually gets to win that turn, and there is no chance to top deck into a brick.
Right. So in a situation like that, I suppose holding the Dance of Death meant that he wanted to score at least a lot of value out of it. So, very interesting. I think I've actually seen Essia play like this before. Even in an aggro matchup, he wants to try to hold his tools like Dance of Death for the best time that he could, even if it means taking a turn away from an aggro game plan.
That's right. And I don't mind that. Like I said, it's probably one of your only, if not best option to deal with an evolved Caraboss. And if you can't deal with that, you probably just die in one swing with it. So, definitely not a terrible option. Alright, so we see both players going out swinging. Pain does not have a 2-drop yet, though. Ooh.
I think that's a very tough position to be in when faced with one of the Goblin equivalents, in this case being Perseus, into the Princess Vanguard. I think even just putting the 1-3 on board and pushing another 2-face here puts Essia in a fantastic position. But he goes for the Kunoichi training here.
I honestly think any of the plays are good now. Missing a 2-drop, especially when you're on the play, in an aggro matchup, hurts so bad, because if you start having to be the defensive player when you're on the play, and you have less evos than your opponent, it starts to feel really bad over time. And I'm sure Pain feels that.
Losing tempo when going first is actually something that I learned from Take-Two is one of the worst positions a person can be in. But the Vite, I think, does a good job of at least holding a bit of damage off and mounts a body. So playing out one of his storms on turn 3 for Essia is a fair amount of damage, but it's not a very strong board position.
Also decides not to trade. So Essia is now assuming the aggro player's role and saying, you know what, you're going to make the trades, I'm going to be the aggressor. And this is where he's got to start thinking. I mean, he can keep pushing face. He's got plenty of it. He's got Novice Trooper. He's got Juliet. He's got Albert in hand. He's got Konoichi Trainee, which can't be targeted by anything in Pain's deck.
Blood has no way of dealing with that other than praying that Vite is enough to encourage a trade.
Right.
I think Essia at this point forward, after committing the Juliet face and not trading earlier, at this point, as you said, he's deciding he wants to use every single evolution orb on face damage here. He has the tools necessary for it. So it's not going to end up being enough without some extra tool off the top, such as an Alvi does. So it is yet to be seen whether Essia is going to be able to stay on that line.
Right. Right. He might have to shift here. And Pain has plenty of resources.
Yeah. I think we might actually see one of the biggest swings that's going to take place in a matchup like this be dependent upon how much value Pain gets out of the Scarlet Sabreur. Because cards like that can just, even a single copy can ruin the aggro game plan here. And as you can see, he has an astounding board dominance at this point, due to the way Essia has decided to approach this game.
That's right. And normally for Blood, it's very hard. And we don't see Sabreur in a lot of aggro decks, and Pain opting for it. But it gives him a perfect option to answer Albert, where Blood normally doesn't have one. Usually they have to play a Dance of Death. But Scarlet Sabreur gaining life as opposed to dealing damage could become very helpful in this matchup to just maybe save off a turn of lethal damage.
I think pulling a 1-drop off the top now could be huge for Essia. It gives him a target for his Princess Vanguard. It gives him an alternative option on how to play out 5 play points rather than just slamming the Albert. And setting up the Kunoichi Trainee to attack alongside an Albert or Alvidas or even just Juliet next turn could be a lot of damage. I think the Sabreur is going to need to come down soon no matter what Essia does.
That's true. I really like that point. So yeah, if Quickblader, aka Taji, comes down alongside Princess Vanguard and Konoichi Trainee, basically Essia is just counting damage. How much damage can my opponent realistically deal to me? Can he kill me next turn? If not, I'm going to go face. If so, then I'm going to trade a little bit, but it looks like he's just going face here. He says, you can't kill me. I'm not worried.
I find the choice of Juliet to be interesting, just because I think the Taji and the Princess Vanguard mounts a little bit more work for Pain to do trade-wise. But without knowledge of the Sabreur in hand, actually, never mind. I think holding that one actually kept just a little bit more damage to play alongside Albert. Sometimes Albert just becomes invisible to me when I focus on everything else in a sword player's hand.
That's right, and this is exactly lethal damage the way that Essia set it up. So perfect setup, even through the Sabreur, getting that lethal damage in. And Essia taking his first win of the round robin, showing that he's no slouch. Pain, you're a new guy. You got to learn the ropes. Come back next week.
Essia will win 1-0 against Pain, and that was oh. Did he just notice lethal? What happened there?
Maybe he didn't know he had lethal, and then he's like, "Wait a minute, I have a 6 play point."
He kind of threw up his hands and was like, "Oh."
He thought he lost until that point.
He's probably like, "How do I trade best here?" And then he's just like, "Wait a minute, I got this."
But what's interesting is, if my memory serves me right, Pain vs. Essia was one of the kind of obstacles that Essia had to overcome and failed to in the Contenders Cup, and now he's been able to kind of earn that revenge. But that's what